this very special conversation. My name is Yvonne Ogiomo Eweka. I work at the Technology and Society Practice at CC Hub as the project manager for GoVote, a project that simplifies election information using civic technology to enhance voters' participation in Nigeria and across all the locations where we are as an organization. The recording has begun, and I would like to welcome our very special guest to give the keynote address for this event. Is none other than Oluwaseun Adepoju, who is our managing partner at CC Hub and manages the Tech and Society practice. I yield the mic to you, Oluwaseun. You are welcome.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon from wherever you are connecting from. It's our greatest pleasure to welcome you to this important conversation today. And I believe there's no better time to have this kind of conversation than now. I believe this kind of conversation around artificial intelligence, especially in its application to the domain of citizen engagement and electoral decision-making, is very important. Also, a very warm welcome to all the panelists, very esteemed panelists that I believe are the best set of people to have this conversation with us today. With artificial intelligence, I believe every new technology goes through those stages of, hype, hope, and truth. And I believe artificial intelligence has received a lot of attention in recent years. And while we talk about the opportunities, the advantages, the pros of artificial intelligence as a technology, especially as it relates to election, we must also come around the table like we have done this morning to have conversation around the cons as well. And, in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of people who are extreme technology optimists and extreme technology skeptics coming to the middle to become technology realists, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, because it is a technology that requires a lot of corporate intelligence to appreciate the opportunity it brings for us, but also to have conversations around how it can be used ethically and also in a very transparent way. So welcome, everyone. I believe we have very solid professionals that we have invited as panelists this morning, and we have no doubt that they are going to do great justice to this conversation today. So I want you to engage, learn, but also come, with the intention that we're going to have conversations that will not just end here, but also spill over to the works we are doing in our different organizations, and also continue to contribute to the knowledge domains within AI and elections, and also across different civic engagement spectrums where artificial intelligence is engaged. So welcome once again, and wishing all of us a very great knowledge spinning and great ideation, but also great learning today. Thank you, Yvonne. Back to you.
Thank you, Oluwaseun. A round of applause to our keynote speaker. Thank you very much. As we all know, this year, 2024, has been described as the year of many democracies. We have over 2 billion people across the world who will be voting in different elections around the world. So it was important for us to have this conversation, given the fact that over 16 countries in Africa would also be having an election, whether at the presidential level, the parliament, or the local level. So this is a very important conversation. We want you to have an open mind, engage the speakers during the question and answer session, and basically just is a knowledge and learning session like the keynote speaker has rightly said. At this point, I will yield the mic to Bulanda Nkwani, who is the moderator for the session, to begin the conversation. Bulanda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, and hi, everyone. So I'm Bulanda Nkwani, and I'll be your moderator for the day. I lead campaigns and partnerships for the Africa region at Digital Action, And of course, we are the conveners of the Global Coalition for Tech Justice that is leading on the Year of Democracy campaign. Of course, this year being a mega election year. And the campaign really is calling for increased investments and improved policies and safeguards by tech platforms during the elections this year and beyond. And of course, we are seeking to address the global equity crisis at the center of tech accountability. Once again, welcome to today's discussion that is focused on artificial intelligence, human rights, and election transparency in Africa, which is really a befitting discussion to have today ahead of Africa Day, which we'll all be commemorating on the 25th of May. I believe it is this Saturday. So really great discussion to be having ahead of that day. And of course, today is really a multi-stakeholder dialogue with subject matter experts on artificial intelligence and its implications on overall digital rights, and of course, election transparency on our continent. As Yvonne rightly put it, this is a mega election year. Over 65 countries will be going to the polls and about 16 within Africa. We're privileged to have some of the panelists that are coming from countries that will be having elections in this year. Federal election, your election is next week, Wednesday. So we're really excited for this discussion and just to hear what is happening and voting there in South Africa. But of course, the main objective of this event is to shine a spotlight on the African electoral landscape from some of the election countries that we have represented today in this discussion, and some that have previously gone through an election, and really just to understand AI's significance and integration in African elections, while also promoting an inclusive ecosystem. That said, I'll now give about 30 seconds to each of my panelists, just to give us a brief introduction, so just tell us who you are, which organization you're representing here this morning, just briefly about yourself and what you do in relation to today's topic. So may I start with Grace? I don't yet see you on the call, but may I start with you, Grace, and then we can come to Samson.
Good morning, everyone. It's good morning. No, it's actually good afternoon where I am. My name is Grace Githaiga. I head Kictanet. We are based in Nairobi. We are a multi-stakeholder think tank that brings different stakeholders that are interested in ICT policy and regulation. And our forte is to ensure or to push for public interest in ICT policies and regulation. In terms of elections, Kictanet has participated in the last 3 general elections as a technology observer. Actually, we may have gone in history as the first technology observer because Kenya embraced tech very early. And we were involved, pre, during and after elections. And so, yeah, we have been there and we have walked that journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grace, for that introduction. Quickly, Samson, may I have you introduce yourself? And then we can go over to Cheryl.
Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Oh, hi, good morning. My name is Samson Itodo, and I work as the executive director at YIGA Africa. YIGA Africa works on elections, on legislative engagement, and citizens' participation. And we've been deploying election observer missions across the continent, and I've been studying, elections. And just recently, we hosted a conference on AI and elections in Nairobi. And Grace, it's good to see you again. And thanks, Yvonne, for the invitation. Apologies, I just arrived in South Africa this morning, I think about 34 hours ago for the South African elections, where part of what we're here to study is how AI will be used in the South African elections. So I'm really looking forward to a great conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Samson, for joining us this morning. Cheryl, over to you, and then lastly, we can have Victor.
Thanks, Belinda. I'm Cheryl Das. I'm the Regional Director of the Legal Resources Center. I'm based in Cape Town. Happy Africa Day for Saturday, everybody. I'm currently heading the Democratizing Big Tech program at the LRC, and we really focus on tech accountability and ensuring safe and accessible internet for all South Africans. The LRC is an organization, we just, that's 45 years old. We're celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. So we're not just focused on tech, but also focused broadly on human, and we also very involved in civic education, and a large part of our work is monitoring elections. Me specifically, I'm the focal point for the Surveillance and Digital Rights Program at the International Network for Civil Liberties Organization. It's a 15-member network comprising members from the Global South and Global North, and we're looking at pushing for globally for tech accountability. Thanks, Belinda.
Thanks, Joe. Victor, over to you.
Thanks very much, and greetings, everyone. My name is Victor Ndede. I work at Amnesty International in Kenya, where I lead the Technology and Human Rights Program. Mostly working on two areas. One is on data governance, and the other is tech accountability, and in relation to essentially having a safer digital technologies that are rights respecting, so that everyone has the best experiences as they use and navigate the digital space. In the field of election,
Could we please mute our mics if we are not speaking, so we don't distract?
It's 2 hours. In the continent, 11.
John, could you help me mute that person? Thanks. Sorry about that. Please go ahead.
11 for 1.
Sorry, Victor, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, so saying we essentially work on safe internet and safe digital technologies for everyone that are rights respecting. And in the elections conversation, we have primarily looked at disinfo, misinfo around elections and the role of tech platforms or platforms in either perpetuating this and pushing towards accountability. Yeah, I think that's all I'd say for now.
Thank you so much to all our speakers for those introductions. I can see we are well represented this morning and afternoon, quite an even spread across the region. We have within Nigeria, from Kenya, and of course, South Africa. And also nice to see that, all our speakers are working on diverse issues from ICT regulation to artificial intelligence directly, elections, observations, and of course, tech accountability. I believe we're in for a great discussion this morning. So just to set on for this morning discussion, I'd like to hear from all of you. What is the current landscape of artificial intelligence in elections in Africa? Could you just briefly speak to that, and of course, giving us some of your country context and some of the perspectives that are holding from within your countries? I'll ask Samson to begin. Of course, you can give us some of the perspectives that you are seeing within Nigeria or the countries that you work in, and then we'll come to Grace, who will give us perspectives from Kenya, Cheryl perspective from South Africa, and of course, Victor, I'll ask you to give us a brief regional overview. So Samson, would you please kick us off? Thanks.
Sorry, Bulanda, I didn't get the question.
Okay, that's fine. I'll repeat it. What is the current landscape of artificial intelligence elections in Africa? What are some of the perspectives that we are seeing artificial intelligence playing out within our African elections, or possible implications of artificial intelligence in elections? Thanks.
Well, thanks. Perhaps to speak to three trends when you look at the entire electoral landscape. I think the first major trend is there's this fetishization of elections across the continent, and different countries, and whether you call them democracies or pseudo-democracies, continue to conduct elections because they see elections as a tool of legitimization. But then the quality of these elections have been called to question. So if you look at a country in Chad, for instance, where there is an inauguration happening today, following what is called elections, most of the elections you see are not elections, but coronation, because Chad never had an election, because you can't call it an election when few weeks to the date of the election, the state uses its forces, attacks the opposition party secretariat, and do what? And kill, opposition leaders. You can't call that an election. That's coronation. In other parts of the continent where we've seen leaders perpetrate themselves in office, amend and adjust constitution to extend their stay in office, when we say that this is a super year of elections, do we really mean a super year of credible elections, or we mean a super year of coronation happening in different parts of the continent? The second trend that, we see, it's about institutional capture. There's a capture of election management bodies happening across board. Togo, a classic example. I've mentioned Chad. Nigeria is not an exception. Even Ghana, you see cases where the state appoints, political apologists and their supporters to man electoral commissions. And how do you expect electoral commissions to deliver on credible elections when they are being manned by politicians or people who pander to the whims and caprices, of political actors? So that's one trend we see. The third trend that also, relates to our discussion is about technology. And we've seen an exponential growth in the deployment of technology for elections, first around biometric voter registration. So currently, there are over 22 to 23 countries on the continent that adopt biometric voter registration. And there are more countries who are switching from manual voter register to biometric voter register. But the more we see, electoral commissions leverage technology, the higher the cost, the economic cost, of elections. So we are increasing the cost of elections, whereas the quality of the elections are not in any way improving. So you look at technology, deploying technology, but I believe technology, yes, is a tool for deepening the integrity of the electoral process, but it's also not a silver bullet. And the way we have framed the discussion on the continent is that technology is the be-all and the is-all solution to all the fundamental problems that we have on the continent when it comes to elections. And there are basically two. One is the question of transparency, and the second one is efficiency, whether technology can bolster the efficiency of electoral commissions to deliver on elections, or it can open up the process for more accountability. Over.
Thank you so much, Samson, for painting that picture. Really interesting to see some of the trends that are emerging there. And of course, interesting to see that a lot of our EMBs are now taking up technology in administering elections. But of course, calling to question some of the issues around efficiency and transparency. In moving along, Grace, what are some of the trends that we are seeing on AI in elections? And do you have any key insights, for example, from the last Kenyan election in the use of AI within that election? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think when we talk of AI, and maybe that is something I will speak later later in the meeting, is that we already saw the use of AI. There was the fact that in 2013, Cambridge Analytica was already used in Kenya And that has continued. So people have continued to receive information, texts, manipulated videos on WhatsApp and even on their social media. So we've seen a lot of disinformation. I'm talking in the present because it has not stopped despite the fact that we are not in an election year. But Kenya happens to be a very unique country that the day we are done with an election, the following day we start working on the next election. So we are consistently in an electoral mode, despite the fact that we are, like the next election is going to be 2027. There's already so much electioneering, there's already so much alignment. So this disinformation and misinformation becomes a threat to democracy, because first it undermines public trust in the very institution that is charged with coordinating our election. The thing is, we don't trust anymore. We don't trust the electoral body, because it has also been accused of misleading the voters. And then, Kenya also is, as it is susceptible to disinformation campaigns, then it brings in the element of polarization along ethnicity. So we have ethnic tensions that continue to happen. So it is this ethnic bloc that will support the ruling party in the year 2032 or in the year 2027. And this ethnic bloc came together with another strong ethnic bloc, and that has sometimes brought in disinformation and false narratives, fake news that have been sometimes very difficult for ordinary citizens, to confront those false narratives. Sometimes even when you're genuine, but you are deemed, again in Kenya, it's a society that I'm able to tell where Victor comes from because of his second name. He's able to tell where I come from because of my second name, and that sort of thing. And so, even if I am genuine and I'm trying to push for a legitimate and truthful piece of narrative, somebody from a different ethnic group may decide that I am standing for that position because maybe somebody from a candidate or a presidential candidate from my ethnic group is seen to be interested. And I think the other thing that we have seen is differences in media literacy levels. So ordinary citizens may not understand that this is disinformation, it's misinformation, it's fake news, because first, they don't have time to verify, or they're not even aware that there's need to verify information. And so that media literacy has affected even our broadcast stations. So some television and radio stations have been identified as leaning towards either the ruling party or the opposition. And therefore, the content that they generate, even if it is news, is judged using that lens, that bias lens. And so, and then we've also seen the prevalence of social media usage. It's huge in Kenya. Twitter, X, it's, that is where people take all their differences. And then, we have with the younger generation using TikTok. And what we are seeing is, digital manipulation is real. And within that, especially for elections, we see women, especially women candidates or women who have put themselves out there, going through online gender-based violence. And there's actually a deliberate move to run out of town some of those candidates who are seen as either strong or not being supportive of a certain situation, party or a candidate. And finally, I want to say that a trend that needs to be, we actually speaking about is the need for effective fact-checking mechanisms. And how do you get this to ordinary citizens so that they understand that if they're in any doubt of any information, that there is need to fact check. But even fact checking, who does fact checking? We have very few organizations doing that. We have very few media organizations armed or, that have fact checking departments. And so, yeah, I'll just speak to some of those trends. Yeah, thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Grace, for those insights. Really interesting to see what is happening in Kenya. And I'll quickly move over to you, Joe, before we come to Victor. What are some of the trends that you're also seeing in South Africa? Thanks. Joe, are you there? If not, Victor, may you please come in with that regional overview of some of the trends that you are seeing in elections and the use of AI?
Thanks very much, Amanda. I think from a regional overview lens, I know one of the things we look at is, most of the debates and conversation on AI and elections have always predominantly sort of looked at the impact of disinformation and the impact of disinformation in elections, and which is one of the key factors we really need to look at, because often it is not viewed as though disinformation is actually an attack on human rights, because in any electoral context, the ultimate aim is that people access quality information or good information, which also aids them in making informed choices at the ballot. And so disinformation, of course, attacks this very right to make informed choices and informed decisions at the ballot. And initially, we didn't see what AI was doing in this space, but increasingly we are now seeing how artificial intelligence tools can actually be used to perpetuate disinformation at a larger scale. Grace has talked about the Cambridge Analytica case that was in Kenya, looking at how data that is scraped off Facebook was able to target voters and essentially polarize voters based on ethnic lines. And that's is something that we need to look at, because it's now manifesting itself across the continent, where we are now seeing more and more cases of disinformation, very coordinated and very efficiently done through the use of AI tools. The other bit that perhaps I would talk about also is what election management bodies are doing with AI, and you see that's also another area we need to be cognizant of, that on the civic side, where AI is impacting voters, there's a lot of conversation, but we also need to evaluate and look at what is sort of the level of adoption of AI tools by election management bodies to sort of augment the work that they do and the outcomes of the work that they do. And one of the things we see across the continent is the uptake is not where it should be, or where there's a split. It's almost like a bulk of countries have chosen to use AI tools to probably in voter transmission, in voter engagement, but also there's another group that has totally not used AI tools. And so to effectively understand how this AI supported electoral processes look like, it would be good for us to understand what really the election management body is doing with these AI tools, and how that is affecting human rights, because human rights and also voter rights, because we do know that we do not, as a continent, majorly develop these tools. And so we do not own or control a majority of these tools. And so if there's no ownership of these tools, then the chances of us saying that we want to use AI to build trust in the electoral system are very slim, because if you don't own these tools, then majority of the people would be like, this is still a foreign influenced election. And so trust has always been a huge trust in the electoral system, and primarily in the electoral management body, have been a huge factor of disputed elections on the continent. And so if electoral management bodies are also using AI tools and not disclosing what these tools are for, and the transparency around where they procure these tools from, we'll still have an issue with trust. And that's why we are seeing some countries are not keen on adopting AI tools for the electoral management bodies. Some countries are also keen on getting these tools, but the challenge still remains whether we own this tool, the cost of bringing these tools, and the cost of actually utilizing these tools. As a factor that we also know is that most election management bodies are also not the most resourced bodies financially, and that is by design to also make it very difficult for them to run elections. So yeah, I think Belanda talked about that for this question.
Thanks so much, Victor. And I'm hearing a lot of concerns on the cost of these tools. Quickly, Cheryl, I see now that you are back. Could you please briefly just give us some of the trends that we are seeing within the current South African election? And if we're seeing any use of artificial intelligence tools within this election? Thanks.
Thanks, Belanda, and sorry for that. Technology has failed the LRC once again. But I'm assuming that we're still talking about what's the general landscape in elections. And I wanted to say, I mean, that I think that we as Africans have been very late to the conversation, and that is concerning. Obviously, you know, within our own unique context as a developing continent, there hasn't been a key priority on our agendas, with connectivity and accessibility to the internet, as well as guarding against censorship, being the key priority on our agenda. But it doesn't mean that AI technology hasn't been used in elections, and it has recently become very topical. And I can just say that in terms of election campaigning and how politicians actually leveraging the use of AI technology to manipulate voters, I think that is, for me, one of the major trends that we are picking up in how popular this tool has been used. So in South Africa, you know, the first instances where we've seen the use of AI technology was with former President Jacob Zuma and his you know, very unsavory relationship with private businesses, where they co-opted you know, a UK firm which mounted a racially divisive campaign that helped him frame a campaign designed to deflect against his fraud and corruption charges. And it was believed to be run by fake personas and bots. We are also currently monitoring social media accounts and political advertising outside of mainstream media in the run-up to this elections. And we're observing political parties using social media to discredit opponents, bring false narratives, and leveraging the ease in which they shift the political discourse through the use of AI technology. And it's not just in terms of campaigning on their own strength through their own accounts, but using influencer accounts. So people that have high followers, that have been essentially leveraging, you know, the platforms use, social media platforms use of, you know, virality and the like features and following features to amplify this type of divisive content and disinformation. And I think for me that is most concerning, and it's something that we need to pay attention to. We've also seen recently the use of AI-generated disinformation, including deepfakes. Recently, the daughter of former President Jacob Zuma shared a deepfake video in which the ex-US President Donald Trump urged South Africans to vote for his new political party. So that is something new, something that we need to pay attention to. Yeah, and I think for me, that's where I would like to leave it, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for painting that picture. Really interesting to see that bad actors are leveraging AI tools to manipulate voters. And even the example that you gave of Zuma's daughter and the use of that deepfake video, especially on a continent where we are saying that our media literacy levels are quite low, especially when it comes to discerning issues around AI-generated content. And moving along, and Samson, this is for you. So we're about 5 months into the much anticipated mega election year. I mean, almost halfway through. What are the key concerns, again, around artificial intelligence in elections? But more importantly, what are some of the policy positions that our regulators should start looking to? We've seen that there have been massive calls to ban the use of deepfakes, for example, within elections. The platforms have also come together agree on the Munich Compact or the Accord in elections. What are some of those possible policy positions that you feel, Africa could be taking up? So what are some of the policy positions that we could be looking to in light of these other conversations that are happening? Thanks.
Well, thanks. I think there are a lot of policy considerations, especially around AI uptake. So if you look at the use cases of AI within election management body, and I just want to make this point that one, I think it's important to actually strike a balance between information integrity and election integrity, and they all connect. Because often the discourse on AI and elections on the continent begins and ends with disinformation. But we're not paying close attention to other aspects of AI uptake and how it undermines democracy and how it undermines human rights. And I'll talk about use cases. So one, if you look at how AI have been employed in voter registration and deepening the quality of voter registers. Now, in a continent where increasingly we are seeing EMBs use either you call it KEMS-KIT in Kenya or the BVAS in Nigeria or the voter management device in South Africa, you're using these sort of tools to accredit voters. Now, in cases where you use facial identification, to verify voters before they cast their vote. If those machines and, have all forms of bias, right, they could infringe on the rights of voters because those machines are designed by people. And so if inherently they are built in such a way that there's bias and there's lack of fairness, it might disproportionately affect, other voters. So for instance, if you're using the device to accredit voters from a particular region, and maybe that region is dominated by people who are either colored or people who have facial marks, those machines can be built in a way that they can actually decline accrediting those voters that come from that particular region. And that's one of the risks that needs to be addressed. And this is why issues around accountability, issues around oversight and independent audits of AI tools and systems employed by EMBs is critical. So if we're formulating any such policy, it has to be built around certain principles, the principles of transparency, accountability, usability. All those principles are important, but you need to have an independent audit of those systems. Secondly, in terms of policy implications, it's about simulation and test runs of those systems. You have situations where EMBs deploy this technology, deploy AI, and by the way, there are very few EMBs on the continent that actually leverage AI because we did a study, or we've been studying AI uptake amongst EMBs, that's election management bodies on the continent. And so far, we've surveyed 27 countries across the continent. And over 80% of EMBs, are skeptical about employing AI for elections because they consider it a new phenomenon. And the big question is AI really a new phenomenon? Because it has been here But it's just that with, this exponential use of generative AI, it's beginning to stimulate conversations about this. And there are just very few countries that actually use AI, whether for voter register management. When you look at the aspect about results transparency, and what we have seen and the opportunity it also provides is we've seen countries beginning to set up platforms where results can be published and people can access those results. And one of the AI technique, computer vision, provides an opportunity where, citizens groups can actually download result sheets and use computer vision to interpret, but also assess or analyze results to see if there's any discrepancy, from the manual results or results that are put online. So it does provide a lot of opportunities, and this is also happening across the continent. I think the last sort of policy implication that I see, and perhaps also an opportunity, it's about the fact that you've got new actors in the electoral space. 10 years ago, social media companies or techies and big tech companies, about 20 years ago, were not part of the electoral process. Now, they are an integral part of the electoral process. And so who is deploying, AI technology for EMBs, and most of these companies are for profits, they are not necessarily driven by public good. So how do you ensure that an institution like EMBs that's responsible for conducting elections, it's performing a lot of oversight around the kind of systems that are deployed, though very expensive, but also whether those companies, who are harnessing personal data or have access of personal data of citizens are using so responsibly. And these are the critical fundamental issues, because the issue around data privacy is critical because AI systems can be very intrusive, and it's important to institute mechanisms that limit, the access to personal data, but also the abuse thereof.
Thank you, Samson, especially for touching on some of the principles of accountability, transparency, and of course, independence that should go into any form of policy formulation. Also quite interesting that you bring up the issue of procurement. So in terms of our EMBs and all of us really being able to pay attention to how we're procuring some of these AI technologies to ensure that we're putting in place the right data protection mechanisms and really just vetting all of these foreign suppliers of these tools and technologies. So Cheryl, I'll quickly move over to you. So your election is slated for next week, Wednesday. What are some of the key issues within this election in relation to AI? I know you earlier spoke about some of the deepfake videos that have been circulating. But also, a lot of us on the call may already know that you've been involved in some of investigations where you've been investigating platforms rather, and some of the harmful ads that they have approved. So would you really just quickly take us through one of those investigations, but most importantly, share some of the learnings from these platform investigations and highlight some of the recommendations that you have, especially around how platforms are using AI tools, in particular around the recommender systems that are AI powered. Thanks.
Yes, Belinda. I think for us, there's three main concerns. The first is a lack of transparency by big tech corporations on their election plans and the vagueness in which they publicly disclose how they plan, for example, to counter election disinformation, what measures they have in place to deploy what they call break glass tools, where there's a real and imminent threat of violence during and post-election day. We still don't have a clear answer. Neither do they have an answer on whether we don't even have an answer on whether these platforms have conducted human rights impacts assessments in Africa, because we all know that we live in different contexts. And most of our elections have been marred by violent protests during and post elections. And they haven't really given us an indication and an answer of how they're going to mitigate that risk. somehow I feel that they don't have the responsibility. The second is a lack of transparency of how their systems are designed to counter disinformation, hate speech, and incitements to violence. So major social media corporations have community guidelines aimed at countering disinformation, hate speech, and incitements to violence, but most have specific guidelines also on election disinformation and political advertising. So our engagement thus far with major social media corporations suggests that content moderation is largely driven by AI technology. And significantly, they have moved towards reducing the number of human content moderators. So they boast that this technology is sufficient to moderate content that violates the community standards at scale. But this is simply not the truth. So we conducted two investigations actually with international organization, Global NGO Global Witness, in June and August last year to test social media platforms' ability to detect extreme and hateful advertisements targeting non-nationals and female journalists in South Africa. So the ads we submitted for approval were based on real-world examples of hate speech and incitements to violence and abuse targeting these at-risk groups. So despite this extreme content of the adverts that clearly breached the social media platform's own policies on hate speech, all 4 platforms approved the vast majority of the adverts. These findings indicate the significant gaps in the platform's ability to effectively moderate harmful content, particularly when it involves nuanced, culturally specific language and country context. The third concern that we have is that people's rights and freedoms offline are being jeopardized by online platforms' current business model, where profit is made by stoking up anger and fear. Their business model, although opaque, monetizes maximum engagement. So their ranking and virality algorithms actively amplifies divisive content, disinformation, and incitements to violence. They are not passive bystanders in spreading disinformation, including election disinformation, and worryingly amplifies hate speech and calls for violence. So this is particularly concerning given that elections in Africa, as I said, are really contested in non-violent ways. An interesting report by the DCU Anti-Bullying Center at the Dublin City University, for example, in their study, said that TikTok and YouTube's shorts algorithms actually promote or actively promote toxic content to boys and young men, for example. They found in their study, as the study progressed, each account was recommended an increasing amount of manosphere content, with the majority of messages promoting harmful masculine norms, misogyny, violence, and spurious advice on mental health. And even though these test accounts did not specifically ask to follow those particular problematic accounts. So in terms of your last question, Belinda, and where we feel or our recommendations in terms of how we should move forward, I think firstly we need greater transparency from tech platforms or tech corporations on elections going forward. They should be compelled to actually conduct human rights impact studies in every country in which they operate. And these studies should be conducted regularly and inform country-specific election plans. So it doesn't really end with this mega cycle, but future planning, we need them to commit to these election plans for the future. And then secondly, there must be equitable implementation and proper resourcing of content moderation systems. And such systems should not overly rely on AI to moderate content unless it's designed within a country-specific context and there's proper human oversight over content moderation. Moderation should also not just be content focused, but also account focused. And lastly, and I think it's one of the easiest and in my view, an actionable recommendation is for recommender systems to be turned off by default. This allows users to have more control of what they see. So I'm going to leave it there, Belinda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, and thank you for pointing out some of those recommendations, especially for the need for greater transparency by the platforms on how they plan to manage the election. So that's in terms of content moderation practices, human rights impact assessments, and of course, country-specific elections plans. In moving along, I'll throw this one to Grace. How can we ensure electoral integrity in light of all these technologies that we've been speaking about this morning. We've seen synthetic media being used increasingly in some of the elections. I believe we've seen a lot of it, especially on the African continent, in Burkina Faso. And you mentioned that in Kenya, we've seen the use of synthetic media from as far back as 2013. So how can we ensure electoral integrity in light of these, technologies that can alter or generate content quite quickly? Yeah, how do we ensure electoral integrity? Thanks.
Thanks, Belinda. I think one of the things that I must point out is that generative AI as well as AI is complex tech, is tech that is evolving, is tech that sometimes you can't predict where it is going, and sometimes there's something new every other day. And what we are also seeing is that there are also social issues that are creeping into the tech. So AI is now becoming, a social tech, and that's presenting a different challenge that's getting, you're introducing the social aspect into AI is bringing its own challenges. So I think one of the things that electoral management bodies must learn now, because AI is here to stay, technology is here to stay, that they need to start thinking of how to oversight elections in light of the AI. So since they're the body charged with the responsibility of also oversighting elections, how do they ensure that that their systems are correct, that they know about the AI models that are being used. They also are conscious of the data sets that will be used. So this can't happen alone. They are not able to do this alone, and so there's need to have more, I love using multi-stakeholderism, but there's need to conduct stakeholder engagement, and this will come from everyone involved in elections, including the voters themselves, especially when it comes to testing. So before conducting the elections, if they're going to utilize tech and they know there's going to be use of AI, it will be important to test the systems in the market and with the voters. And this is to ensure that the goal of elections is met in a timely and satisfactory manner that satisfies not just the candidates, but also the voters. Now, the thing to note here is that not everyone is an AI expert. And so how can, then when you bring the different stakeholders together, how can the different stakeholders help in, in breaking down the risks of AI, and what will be the measure of accountability, and what responsibility are we placing on both the electoral management bodies and the voters and even the candidates. So of course, some candidates are very powerful and have like speed dial to the head of the electoral management body. So one, I think there's need to align. So what are we going to be measuring and determining that in using AI, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. Then we will be saying, what will we be testing? Is it voter registration? Is it the counting of votes using AI? And this can only be done again when you have, you have stakeholder engagement that allows for transparency. I think both I and Victor spoke about the need for fact-checking, and fact-checking is really important. It has become very important in this day and age, because You see images, you get text messages. Sometimes you can't tell their veracity. And so electoral management bodies, I think, will need to forge partnerships with fact-checking bodies so that there is a way they can establish transparent and independent fact-checking processes. In the last election in Kenya, we had an engagement with the Electoral Commission, and one of the things we pointed out was that they were not providing adequate information to the citizens, and so there was a lot of fake news going on. Of course, generated by AI. It is just that the conversation on AI was not, was not as much as it is today. So one of the things, apart from working with fact checkers, is that there'll be need to have public awareness, and again tied to what I raised earlier, and media literacy. So again, working with stakeholders, electoral management bodies will need to work with stakeholders to promote public awareness and even media literacy, hold media literacy campaigns to educate the voters, to educate the candidates, and generally electoral stakeholders about the risks of AI, especially where information is concerned, and even the use of generative AI, because we've started seeing a lot of videos that look real and yet they have been done using generative AI. And of course, there's the synthetic media that is completely changing information every other time and making it look like it is real. So what electoral bodies need to do is that in this day and age of AI, to stop mistrusting media, to stop mistrusting civil society organizations, and work together with them, work together with tech companies, and actually come up with a formula that can support the electoral management bodies. So here we are talking, they need to think of what authentication and verification mechanisms will be put in place, especially to check on content, on audio and video, to ensure authenticity and integrity. And that can only be done when you have stakeholder engagement. And finally, I want to just speak because part of the conversations have been on the needs to regulations. And as somebody speaking, and who has worked in internet, and knowing that, yes, we support regulation, but we always support necessary regulation that will allow us to conduct ourselves in a manner that respects other people's rights. That whole question of, your rights stop where mine begin. And for this, and knowing that especially African governments love regulation, sometimes we keep saying there's too much regulation, but it's also not being used. Every other legislator wants to do that. So we will need adaptive policy making. My call is, let's allow for experiments, let's allow for innovation and for understanding of this of AI. So I would suggest for having sandboxes, and in that one we have access to information, to text, to media, all built around AI, and then we allow people to experiment before we can come up with regulation. So I would go for guiding principles as opposed to hard legislation, and just call for that we just put guardrails. So this calls for more intentional regulation, that we need more guardrails and mechanisms, and stakeholder engagement. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Grace, and particularly for pointing out the multi-stakeholder approach. I know we all sometimes tend to want to lump responsibility on one stakeholder. We're almost in the 9 minutes of our conversation. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat section and we'll address them at some point. But in moving along, Victor, and I'll come to you. So a lot of the conversations around, the use of artificial intelligence, regardless of the industry and especially within elections, spell out a lot of doom and gloom. I know Samson alluded to some of the positive use cases, especially when it comes to EMBs, and within the management of elections. So, for example, in voter registration and results transparency. And an interesting case also that we saw within the Pakistan election was the use of a fake video by one of the candidates, Imran Khan, where he issued more of like a campaigning message or a message to support some of the candidates from his election cell, or rather it was depicted as if he was saying it from his from his prison cell. So that said, Victor, do you see any positive uses of artificial intelligence in elections? Perhaps aside from what the EMBs are doing, are there any other practical positive use cases that you see, or any potential use cases, so that we're not looking at it from the doom and gloom perspective? Thanks.
Oh, yeah, thanks very much, Landa. Yes, of course, every time tech and AI is mentioned, it's always very doom and gloom, and a lot of the times we have felt as though it's something we should feel and not see how it works. And so I think I really resonate with the sentiments of Grace around basically creating the guardrails and providing those regulatory sandboxes just to see how best this can work. One of the things we are sure of is, of course, mentioned is that AI is not going anywhere, and a lot of guys in the tech side have argued it's here to augment what we do. And so I think quickly moving, I think there's a fair chance that AI can actually be used to engage in one of the most important things around electoral processes, which is voter education. And I think there has been mooted opportunities for people to explore sort of like AI chatbots that engage voters on explaining things around voter processes, like what is the voting process, this is what you do on the ballot day, and these are things that can really be augmented by AI and someone just basically interacting with sort of an AI chatbot to take them through what the voting process looks like, and stuff like that. So basically, voter education can be one positive way to use AI in an electoral context. But we're also seeing a possibility of AI tools to actually counter disinformation and misinformation, in the sense that we may have tools that can help us, of course, go through vast amounts of data and potentially flag misinfo and disinfo content that is moving across the platforms and also moving across the country in an electoral context. And this would, of course, ensure that we do have information integrity in that electoral context. And so perhaps the other one is also on really looking at data analysis by electoral management bodies. Could also be another area that AI is useful in, and probably looking at AI basically showing us what perhaps is the voter patterns, sort of what is the turnout, what is the peak times for people to come out to vote. You have basically, it can get you all this data that could help us guys in CSO and even the electoral management body itself plan better for elections, and it could inform very many decisions. And so AI could really be used in data analysis. I'll be picky and take a question that I saw someone put on the chat because it relates to this question. And it's how AI can aid in accessibility. I've seen someone had put a question around accessibility on the chat, and I think there's a chance that, looking at how AI systems are can be designed, it can actually help in sort of breaking down barriers to electoral processes that exist for persons with disabilities, and looking at, say, languages, voice, and other tools. So I think so far that's learned.
Thank you so much, Victor. Clearly, there are a lot of positive use cases that we can point to. So getting to our last question, and I hope that our participants will also be getting ready with some of their questions. What can we do differently to ensure transparency and respect for human rights in elections amidst all the AI adoption in electoral processes in this mega election year? So a lot of our countries will be going to elections this year, all of them with different dynamics, some of them, affected by conflict. So putting all that into mind, what can we do differently to ensure that there's transparency and respect for human rights in election processes, but also amidst all this AI adoption? I don't know who to start with, but perhaps we can start with you, Samson. I think you haven't spoken in a while. We can start with you, Samson, and then come backwards to Cheryl, Victor, and of course, Grace can close for us. Over to you, Samson.
I think one thing we can do differently is to first recognize that voting is a human right, and there are other rights that are embedded or are expressed when people go to vote. One is the right of expression, the freedom of expression, the freedom of thought, as well as the freedom of association. And I think that it's important to recognize that it's a human right. And so EMBs need to respect those rights because during elections, there are other rights that are impacted. So issues around, data privacy. So if EMBs are saddled with the responsibility of sharing voter roll with political parties, they must ensure that they're redacted information so they don't compromise the privacy of voters. That is important. The other thing because EMBs need to recognize that. The other point is to also recognize the impact that this information can have on the voting rights of people. Because where you have disinformation that is not countered, and then it misleads people and it undermines the quality of choice that they make, then there has to be consequence for it. And I think it's this point about EMBs ensuring consequence. It's really critical. But we can't have this conversation without thinking about the other actors. And it's about the criminal justice system. And I think that there's some work that needs to be done around redefining what is a crime within our different electoral jurisprudence or criminal jurisprudence, because we need to get the courts to continue to take decisions that protect the rights of people. We've seen that happen in some parts of Africa, but we need to elevate that discussion. And lastly, what we need to do differently is to encourage voters, to encourage citizens in these countries where you have elections or those who don't have elections to show up to vote. That voting, is a fundamental right. The decline in turnout across the continent should be troubling and disturbing. And so we should encourage people to come out, to vote and to make informed choices, and that they have a responsibility, for determining what leadership emerges out of this entire processes, but also their oversight. And I think citizens need to take personal responsibility, for pushing back on whether fake news or misinformation, because there is an avalanche of tools that are available for them to fact check whatever information and test their credibility.
Thanks a lot, Samson. Cheryl, over to you. What can we do differently to ensure transparency and respect for human rights in elections amidst AI adoption?
Thanks, Belinda. I just want to say that I agree with all of the points that Samson has raised. And I just want to sort of add to that. I think in addition to that, and I know that, lots been talked about the role of electoral management bodies as well as over-regulation or and providing, proper guidance. I think that the foundations of a free and fair election is premised on honesty and not illusion. And when there is a possibility of a distortion of the truth, that can never be good for democracy. And neither is it conducive to free and fair elections. So there must be a balance between over-regulating technology that would impact accessibility to technological advancements that will improve our economies in the regions, as well as people's lives in the region, against protecting Africans from harmful business practices of profit-driven big tech corporations. So regulation of AI gives us more agency to hold not just political parties and their influencers accountable for using AI maliciously to manipulate the electorate, but also it is a tool to also create obligations on those private entities, private business corporations that profit from these harmful business practices. And it creates obligations for them to ethically develop those technologies within the human rights framework that protects electoral integrity. So I think that in addition to what Samson says, I would say that what we need to do differently is to really look at creating that balance through regulations. I don't think that it lies solely with electoral management bodies. They don't have the resources. Their funding has been cut throughout the years. They don't have the power to do that. Our own IEC has put together, or the collectors of electoral management bodies, to develop guidelines for the African region. I don't think that that's near enough, because it doesn't really, it's a gentleman's agreement. It's something to watch, to monitor. It's a monitoring tool. It's a policy aspiration, but I don't think it's near enough to actually address the root causes of why our electoral system is being watered down because of manipulation through AI technology.
Thanks, Joe. Indeed, we need to create a balance to regulation. What's your take on the question?
Sorry, Belinda, did you ask her to go first?
Yes. So what, as the part in short, what can we do differently to ensure that there's transparency, respect for human rights in elections, especially with all the technological advancements?
Okay, thanks. I think the way forward, one of the things that we have kept saying is that we need to categorize or properly classify disinformation as an attack on human rights. I think, in my view, I think that's when people actually take it quite seriously, because I think people may have just seen it as maybe an attack on the information ecosystem, but don't look at it as a human rights violation, and which then, of course, requires certain measures to be taken legally against that. Because you see, when you look at disinformation and how it manifests itself, it's essentially an attack on free expression or freedom of expression, and also the right to access information. Because you see, in an electoral context, people have the right to seek, receive, and even impart information in order to make informed choices on the election day. And so, just as Samson had said, it is important for us to also realize that for choice to be free, it must be informed. And to be informed, it has to be devoid of any intimidation. And you see, most of the disinfo campaigns take the form of intimidation and suppression. And so voters essentially have the right to seek, receive, and impart accurate information that would allow them to make very informed choices on the election. Also, we see electoral-related disinformation as basically efforts to subvert people's right to vote, because often in the information ecosystem, disinformation is designed to overwhelm fact-based dialogue. So by basically intentionally deceiving voters, creating confusion, exacerbating ethnic polarization, and ultimately, the aim is usually to undermine public confidence in the electoral process and the electoral management body. So I think we really need to classify this as a human rights violation and take it through the human rights how to remedy this from a human rights standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. And lastly, Grace, what can we do differently to ensure that there's respect for human rights and, of course, transparency in elections amidst the AI adoption, but also just broadly looking at it from the perspective that, this is a mega election year. Thanks.
I think for me, am I on? Yeah, okay. I think for me, again, I'll just go to my favorite term. We have to prioritize inclusive and participatory decision-making processes in the development and implementation of AI technologies in electoral processes. That's it. And this involves engaging, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but this involves engaging the diverse stakeholders involved, and they include civil society organizations, human rights advocates, election observers, and representatives from marginalized communities. And this has to happen in the design, in the testing, and in oversight of AI-driven electoral systems. This is the same thing we told our electoral commission when they were implementing the KIMS kits, and we said there is need to involve the stakeholders in all those processes. So I believe if we do that, we will not miss to come up with a middle ground where all of us can actually agree that AI adoption is going to support in upholding democratic principles of an election that respects human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thanks a lot to all of our speakers this afternoon. We'll now open up for a Q&A session. Any reflections from today's discussion, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll be able to spot you. But in the meantime, I'll just go through some of the comments that we are seeing here. So there are quite a number of that have been shared. There's one that's called Glass Ballot, currently live and being used to conduct a number of university elections. It aims to bridge the gap in trust, transparency, and voter audit of the entire election process. So hopefully they're learning from them for the other elections. I see also Fact Check Africa recently unveiled a tool that is AI powered and used as a fact-checking platform. Please do check that out. And of course, a question here, and perhaps someone you may be well placed to answer this. Over the years, there has been a recurrence of low turnout of persons with disabilities in the election process. What role could AI and emerging technologies play in improving their active participation and inclusion in the election process? Before we come to you, Samson, let me just see if there are any hands. Okay, no hands. So perhaps we can answer that question. I'm hearing a pop-up, but I can't see you. Okay, I see we have a question from Dr. Debuni. May we have your question, Dr. Debuni, then we come to Yusuf, and then we can answer that question from the chat.
Because I'm a member of the Internet Society Nigerian chapter, I'm also fortunate to have been in the forefront of discussing the issue of artificial intelligence in Africa on the platform of the DNS African Media and Communication. My focus is on our attention to rural areas when it comes to the benefit of artificial intelligence. That is one. Two, and to be brief, is how are we preparing the next generation of Africans for artificial intelligence? Are we going to sit with our scheme of education when we understand that our young person or our individual people of different of regions are over intelligent or probably very intelligent to be able to catch up with the current trends and advancement in artificial intelligence. How do we want to equip them? Thank you. To be brief, thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I didn't quite get the first part, but it was something addressing rural areas, rural populations. But the part that I got was how to prepare young people to catch up and take advantage of all these technological advancements. Yusuf, may we please have a question? And then the panelists can get ready to answer those things.
You got it correct.
Yusuf, are you able to unmute?
I'm with you. Can you hear me clearly, please?
Yes, please go ahead. Maybe you could speak slightly louder.
I've been following the conversation since morning, and I must say that I'm truly inspired. But I have this concern. My question is, if we actually deploy AI to digitize and democratize elections in the African continent, how capable are we to prevent votes from being compromised and distorted and manipulated even by, desperate politicians who are willing to hire, black hats to go through the system and manipulating and actually inflate the vote? So what do you think we can actually do around this? That's my question, sir.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Samson, you can kick us off with answering the one around enhancing participation of people with disabilities within the electoral process, and then we can have the other speakers address the rest. Thanks.
Well, so there are several ways. And first, there's a lot of agency on the part of EMBs, because when you think about AI, you think about data. So if from voter registration, the EMB is not tracking disability, and also the form of disability, because there are different forms of disability. And each of these forms of disability impact on how you deploy for elections. So a classic example. So if you have visually impaired persons with disability, they would need Braille ballot guides to cast their vote, unlike, hearing impaired. So there is need for EMBs to review their voter registration software. Some EMBs across the continent haven't done that. At least I know for South Africa, they've done that. I know Nigeria has done that. There are a few EMBs, but a lot of EMBs haven't revised their voter roll to capture the persons with disability, because that data, if mined, can enhance deployment of assistive materials to polling stations. So it actually begins from there. The second point is how voter mobilization initiatives responsive to persons with disability. And this is where a lot of work needs to be done around this inclusivity in our voter mobilization and voter education. The third bit is about accessibility to polling stations. How accessible are polling stations to persons with disability? How many polling stations have ramps where persons with disability can actually access? And if you go across the continent, you would find, and I'm not exaggerating, that 80%, of elections that I've observed across the continent have gone to polling stations where they are just inaccessible to persons with disability. Although the law provides that they can be assisted, to cast their vote. But to the question about data, because if you have data about persons, with disability at their polling station, you can actually, depending on their population, you can use machine learning or even deep learning to situate and locate polling units where they can be accessible to persons with disability. And that's a huge opportunity that AI can, for AI. But you can also, like Victor talked about chatbots, we can make chatbots disability friendly in a way that persons with disability can use to engage with the electoral process. So there's a lot of things that can be done to encourage persons with disability, but I think EMBs are at the forefront. Political parties are also also need to be held responsible because they are the first beneficiaries of elections. And if they want votes, persons with disability are also voters in their large numbers. So they should have targeted PWDs, voter mobilization efforts. Currently, it's just EMBs and civil society and perhaps some media organizations that focus on that category of voters.
Thanks, Samson. Again, taking us back to having a multi-stakeholder approach. Dr. Grace, perhaps you can take the one on how do we prepare young people to catch up with technological advancements, but also how to ensure that rural populations are not left behind, and that they're also, benefiting from some of the positives of AI, bearing in mind that most African countries are yet to achieve 100% broadband connectivity.
Yeah, I think I had already answered Ahmed on the chat, and I'll just read what I had said is that there's need for intentional prioritization of investments by both governments and funders in digital infrastructure, including broadband connectivity. And in, we are now starting to talk about the need to have community networks as the last mile provider of communities that have not been reached, of mobile networks, and also digital literacy. You have digital literacy centers. So if you have community networks, then you can have the literacy themselves as digital literacy centers for the marginalized. And this, of course, is to expand access to affordable and reliable internet services, and it is in those marginalized areas. I also highlighted the fact that many African countries now have universal service funds in place. However, how they are managed and who is benefiting from these funds is what is the issue. And that is one of the things that we must agitate for, because they were established to support the marginalized communities, or in places where infrastructure or putting up infrastructure does not make economic sense for the service providers. In terms of the youth, I think I would say it differently, because in this, in Kenya, it is actually the youth who are really way ahead in terms of tech. And I think maybe what we should be talking about here is the need for, fact checking, bringing in ethical practices in what is shared, issues of data protection, and then digital security. How do they safeguard themselves on that?
Thank you so much for that response. Victor, perhaps you can take this one up. How capable are we to prevent manipulation and compromise of a lot of these AI-powered systems and tools that we've been recommending, or that we are seeing being used in the electoral process? And as you think about that, Cheryl, perhaps you could speak to this one also in terms of, so a lot of the speakers have mentioned building stakeholder engagement. What would this exactly look like? So we can start with you, Victor, and then we move on to Cheryl. Thanks.
Sorry, I didn't catch that question quite well. My network is acting. You can
Okay,
start with Cheryl. I'll try trace it. Okay, you can go ahead.
I could quickly repeat it. How capable are we as a continent to prevent manipulation and compromise of AI-powered systems that have been recommended for use in the electoral process?
Great. Thanks. Yeah, so I think on that question, the capabilities, of course, not that much, given that we don't develop these systems ourselves. And so it's just basically a call for more resources to develop these tools ourselves, and also more transparency from the people who develop these tools, because up until that happens, it's very difficult for us to control the outcomes of these tools. And so it would need us to either develop our own solutions for the continent and even for our own specific country context, or actually call for more transparency in how these systems that are deployed in our electoral system can actually developed, and what sort of data they rely on, and how they're trained to use this data. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Victor. Cheryl, what would stakeholder engagement look like?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of us talked about multi-stakeholder engagement, and I think this is across the board. I don't think that the electoral management bodies, particularly in the election context, can do this on their own. So it requires engagement, not just with fact checkers, with researchers and CSOs, but also with governments, those who, the decision makers. It's also from a regional perspective, I think that we need to leverage, you know, multi-stakeholder engagements at the AU level. I think we need to start influencing regionally around this talk. And then lastly, it's around engaging the platforms or, you know, tech corporations themselves, as well as those who support them, their investors and their advertisers. I think in order to push the narrative to create more ethical AI, we need all of these people to engage at different levels.
Thanks a lot, Cheryl. I know we've come to time. Hamad, I know you also had your hand up. Could you quickly pose your question in under a minute? We get it addressed and then we close the session. Hamid, are you able to quickly come in? Okay.
Oh,
If
sorry.
not,
Hello, can you hear me?
yes, we can. Quickly, please.
Okay, my question has already been answered by Mrs. Grace. So I don't have any other question to ask.
Okay. Thank you very much. I believe all questions have been addressed. It's really just to thank all of our panelists this morning, this afternoon. Thank you for an engaging conversation. I keep hearing hands going up. Unfortunately, we've come to time. We have to close now. Is it something we can answer in under a minute? Okay, we'll just proceed. Again, it's just a big thank you to our speakers. It's really been an enlightening conversation this morning and afternoon for some of you. I'll not attempt to dilute all of the great things that you have said and all of the recommendations in the interest of time, but really it's just to thank you for quite an engaging conversation, and of course, all of the participants for joining. I mean, I'm leaving with a lot of learnings, a lot of takeaways, and I hope that it is also the same for you. That said, I'll now ask all of us to please turn on our cameras so we can take a quick group photo. So could we all just have our cameras on so we can take a quick group photo? Just so we're able to look back on this day and see who was in the room. I think people are camera shy. I can only see Yvonne and the speakers turn their cameras on. Going once, twice. Gone. Okay. I think we can have the photo now. I mean, please help us. I believe the photo has been taken. Thank you very much. I'll now hand us back to Yvonne. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ikechukwu, can you please display the QR code for the feedback? Yes. Thank you very much, our esteemed speakers. We really appreciate your time here today and how you have tackled all the questions that have been posed. Election is the cornerstone of democracy, and understanding the use of AI in Africa's election process is crucial for fostering transparent and inclusive governance in Africa. From all of us in CCO, we say a very big thank you to all the speakers, the moderator, the participants who has found out time to be here today on this conversation. We encourage you to keep the conversation going, continue to engage, continue to have this conversation so that we can have a more transparent and inclusive democracy in Africa. Once again, we say thank you. Please take out time to scan the QR code on display and share your feedback with us on the areas you think we can improve, what you found very useful during the conversation, and how can better improve for that conversation. Thank you all very much once again. And also to our very esteemed moderator, thank you for how you have been able to manage the time. We appreciate you, and have a very beautiful afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.